There we go. Call to order the December meeting of the Finance Committee. We have a lot of folks here today. A lot of y'all have folks that normally do not come to this meeting, so let me make a few opening comments. There are 4 members to the committee, Mr. Taylor, myself, Ms. Adams, and Mr. McIntosh. We also have with us 3 of the other 4 council members. All council members are welcome at the committee, but only the 4 of us will be voting. Anything that is approved tonight will go, normally it would go next week. The city normally meets on the 1st and 3rd Mondays of the month for council meetings, but because of the Christmas holidays, we will not have a meeting next week, and so anything that is approved tonight will go to the first meeting of the full council, which will take place on January the 3rd, which is a Tuesday. Normally we would meet on Monday, but New Year's is on Sunday. We don't have holidays on Sunday, so Monday will be official holiday, and Tuesdays when the council will take place, and the mayor will chair that meeting. The agenda is broken into 2 categories. We have the consent agenda, which has got 17 items on it. 18. Well, mine's got 17 anyway. We'll just deal with that in a minute.
Yeah.
We may or may not pull items off, but the ones that are not pulled off will be passed in one motion, and then we will go over the general items that will be done one at a time. With that, if I'll ask the committee, are there any items on consent that anyone would like pulled?
I move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. And we do vote electronically now, so y'all just have to wait. We have to go all the way to the satellite and back down.
And that's only if we paid the bill.
There we go. If everybody please vote.
Yes, mine didn't get that.
Ms. Adams says she didn't get it, but she's in favor.
Come on. Yeah, I'm good.
Looks like a user error to me over there.
Yeah.
All right, those were approved. Thank you very much. We will now go to the general agenda. If the city clerk or whoever's over there will please read it.
Sure. Item G1, information on the financial statement audit, single audit, and the annual comprehensive financial report.
Ms. Latham, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chair Clark.
Pull that mic a little closer. There you go.
Good afternoon, Chair Clark, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and members of the City Council.
Good afternoon.
The city's annual financial and compliance audit was recently completed, as well as the city's annual financial report. You have an electronic copy of the annual financial report included in your packet. However, if you do need a printed copy, please let me know, and that will be provided for you. Dan Goggerty, Audit Director for Cherry Beckert, is here to review the required information and the audit presentation for you. Before he comes forward, I would like to recognize those in finance who are here tonight for their work in preparing the city's annual financial report. Would you all please stand? Dewey Willard, who's the city's controller, Doris Godet, Accounting Services Manager, and Cindy Novak, who's our Deputy Finance Officer. If there are no immediate questions, I'll turn the floor over to Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The city does use an outside third-party independent audit company. This is who this gentleman represents. Sir, you have the floor. If you'll give your name and address for the record.
Sure. My name is Daniel Goggerty, and I'm the audit director at Cherry Beckert. And I'm just going to pull up the screen here. All right. Well, thank you for having me this afternoon, this evening. Always exciting for us to be able to speak to you all about the audit results and let you know what we found as a result of everything. We also like to just first recognize the team that completed your audit here, with myself as the audit director, Ron Conrad as the second reviewer, Richard Hart was the senior manager, and Sam Stroh was the senior. Going right past the agenda here, go right into the results of our audit. We perform our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. We also perform our audit in accordance with government auditing standards. That's all which to form an opinion that a reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. We also complete a compliance audit for you all, which is an audit on your federal and state dollars that you receive and spend. And we have issued an unmodified, or also known as a clean opinion, on all 3 of those reports. And that is the highest level opinion we can give under our auditing standards. Here's just a snapshot of the single audit programs that we audited this year. Programs are tested based on risk assessment that is completed as part of our audit, and we have to test those. Some programs have to be tested every year, and some programs will be tested in 3-year increments. And so from the federal program listing here, we had the Federal Transit Cluster, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, all which those 3 were coronavirus or COVID-related dollars that were deemed to be a high-risk program by the federal agencies and required to be audited, even though they may have been audited in the prior year. And then the last one, which is not COVID-related, is the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Program, in which we had not looked at that program in the last 3 years. And the state program to be audited was the PAL bill program, which is the street funding that you all receive from the gasoline tax that you spend on your streets. And then the state maintenance assistance program, which is a program you've had before, but it had not had any funding in the prior 2 audits. And one thing I'll just mention here as well, there's 12 compliance requirements that we're testing here, and we're testing internal controls as well over those compliance requirements. Some of those compliance requirements include allowable costs, allowable activity testing, making sure that what you spent it on was allowable under the program. Other things included there is cash management, period of performance, procurement, so how you actually procure the dollars, make sure that you're following federal statutes. There's other special tests and provisions that's kind of a catch-all for other things. And then subrecipient monitoring is also another big one that's required as well. And out of these 12 requirements, the federal agencies ask us to look at 6 out of the 12 in any given year, and they may rotate around every given year. I will note that this presentation may seem a little bit more wordy than it's been in the past. I just want to make you aware that we used to issue a 2-page letter. We've now formulated that letter into this presentation rather than sending a separate letter. But I do not plan to read off the slides word for word. This slide just basically tells you that we are not testing the effectiveness of internal controls, but we do test internal controls. And if we were to find any issues with internal controls that we considered or deemed to be a material weakness or a significant deficiency, we are required to report that to you all. A material weakness is going to be defined as more than a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement could go undetected without proper controls in place. And then a significant deficiency is one less than a material weakness, but still important enough to let people know, to let those such as yourselves know about it. And we did note one material weakness in our audit, which I'll go over on the next slide. The one material weakness we had related to the Federal Transit Cluster and State Assistance Maintenance Program. While we tested allowable costs and found no issues with compliance, in which none of the invoices we tested were for an unallowable cost, they were all allowable under the program. We did notice that the review of the invoices was not adequate. Wanted really someone from a department level that would be very firsthand knowledge of the work being performed to review those invoices and sign off on it. And so from City's corrective action plan, this is just an excerpt that just notes that the Director of Transportation had been doing that for some of the invoices back in November, I think, of 2021, but now they will do it for all the invoices going forward, starting in September of 2022. And for more information, page 264 of the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report will detail out more of management's corrective action. Other findings, so this one isn't deemed to be a material weakness or a significant deficiency, but it was something where we still felt that we would recommend something in place to improve the processes. And so this related to quarterly reporting under the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, in which one of the reports that we requested was not able to be found to test. This report is housed at the federal level, and we just recommended that those reports be pulled down and kept on file, along with any supporting documentation that supports any of the numbers in the report itself. We also are required to report to you any corrected or uncorrected misstatements. We had no corrected misstatements, which means the financial statements that you have that have been provided to you are the financial statements that were provided to us at the beginning of our audit. We did not have any audit adjustments to those statements. From an uncorrected misstatement standpoint, we did have one uncorrected misstatement related to leases receivable. So GASB 87, which is the lease standard, was applicable this year for the first time for the city. And this related to a small adjustment related to a difference between the timing of when the payments of a lease were less than the term of the lease. And so it was ended a little too early and needed to be extended out a few more years. And so this adjustment was really just an accounting adjustment. It had no effect on any of your cash flows. And management had looked at the adjustment, and based on where we were in the timing of delivering the financial statements, decided to pass on that adjustment based on the size, and we agreed with the decision to pass on it. So next couple of slides is really a lot of that pre-printed language from the letter that you used to see, and so we're just confirming note 1 is where your significant accounting policies are, and the city did adopt a new accounting policy this year, which was GASB 87, which in effect put your right to use asset and a lease liability on the books for all leases, whether they be capital or operating in nature. And then also for government specifically, you also in a lessor situation where you lease out would record a receivable as well. From a related party standpoint, we are to look at related party transactions, any that we tested. If we find anything that was not already disclosed to us by management, we'd have to make you aware. We did not note anything that was not already disclosed to us, and we did not note any issues with any related parties. We also are required under the standards that have changed in the past year to disclose to you any significant or unusual items. We had no significant or unusual items, but just to define it for you all, a significant is outside the normal course of your business and unusual in nature, timing, or size. We also disclose to you any estimates that management uses. Throughout the audit process or throughout the development of the financial statements, there are a number of numbers in those financial statements that are developed based on estimates. Those are listed here, such as your allowance, depreciation, your pension and other post-employment benefits, your incurred but not reported liabilities, your landfill liability and lease liabilities all have some form of estimates included in how the numbers are developed. We looked over the assumptions used by management and make sure they were reasonable, also in that they were consistent with the previous year and how it was applied. Financial statements were neutral, clear, and consistent, and we found no significant disclosures that we need to report to you. From a non-attest service, a attest service would be an audit service, so non-attest being our non-audit service that we provide. We do fill out the data collection form, which is a form that's submitted to the federal government based on our single audit to show them what programs have been audited and what opinions we gave on those programs. That is something we have to do, but it is considered a non-attest service, so we'd have to just let you know that we did do that, but management has the expertise, skills, and knowledge to oversee and certify the information before submitting. And from an independent standpoint, independence being the cornerstone of our profession, we do certify that we are independent of the city. We had no difficulties encountered at our audit. We had no disagreements with management of our audit. We had no auditor consultations. That's a new one that we would be required if we consulted within our team, outside of our team. We did not have any of those for this audit. We received a management representation letter for October 31st and for November 23rd. October 31st being the date of the financial statements and November 23rd being the date of the compliance reports that we issued. There were no management consultations, no other findings or issues to report, no fraud or illegal acts to report, and no going concern to be evaluated. Other things in the annual financial report include a required supplementary information. This is your management discussion and analysis and pension notes, or pension schedules in the back after the notes. We provide no opinion on those schedules under our standards. And then we have supplementary information, which is your combining fund level, non-major funds statements in the back and budgetary schedules, in which again, we provide no direct opinion, but we do give an in relation to opinion, which means in relation to the financial statements, they are free from material misstatement. And the last is other information, which is your introductory and statistical sections, which we provide no assurance, but we do read the information to make sure consistency. And these are the 4 GASBs that will be applicable to the city in the coming years, 94 and 96 of which will be applicable next year, and management will evaluate the effects of those statements in the coming year. Next few slides are from the Local Government Commission. So these are different performance indicators that last year.
If I could hold for 1 second.
Yes.
For the folks out there, the Local Government Commission is somewhat unique to the state of North Carolina. My recollection, it was put in place after the Great Depression to be sure that there was some oversight on local governments, and it's an organization that we as a city have to go to get any bonds we sell approved and things of that sort. And Mayor, I think you served on it, or?
Yep.
So it's a nice independent assessment of what we're doing and a little bit of oversight. And they used to say that no bonds in the state of North Carolina that were approved by the Local Government Commission have ever gone bad. I don't know if that's still true, but that's who they are. It's a very valuable asset we have in the state. Anyway, please continue.
Yep. So with this performance indicator in particular, this is your fund balance available at the general fund level, which may look different from what you see on a year basis from management, because this, unlike usual fund balance, is including restricted and committed balances, and it also includes your debt service fund balance. So here you can see a steady incline for the past 3 years to about 46%, but again, this does include restricted and committed fund balances, so it's not necessarily available in the sense available to be spent on anything. And the threshold is 25%. Next one is a quick ratio, which is related to your current assets to current liabilities in the water sewer fund, in which you have around 2.9 to 2.8 in any given year. This year went down a little bit. There's not really a lot to that in terms of the increase and decreases. It's not very large. You want to be above a 1.0. But I will note here that a lot of other cities of your size are around this ratio as well.
I will say your chart, because you cut it at 2.75, make these differences look very large when in fact they aren't.
Yep. And then the other indicator here is your operating net income excluding depreciation, but including any debt principal paid, is about $36 million. But I will note as well, that's not included in here is capital outlay that you are spending on improvements to the water system. And again, I would say you're very familiar and similar to other cities of your size. So from other performance indicators, we want to make sure that you didn't collect less than you budgeted, in which that was not the case. You did have a positive general fund balance, so that was a positive indicator as well. You had no pre-audit process, or you have effective pre-audit process to avoid any budget violations, no late debt service or covenant issues, and no statutory violations to note. So with that, I will open the floor for any questions, but I do also want to recognize, as Kelly noted, the finance staff, and then also those in the departments that we deal with on the single audit side, having to do our compliance audits. So I really do appreciate everyone's efforts at the city in terms of getting this, and everyone that we have dealt with has dealt with us in a good manner and has answered all our questions thoroughly and timely.
Any questions, Mr. McIntosh?
Can we go back to page 11 and talk about the overstatement of leases
Yep.
receivable? I don't have my mind wrapped around that.
Sure.
Can you just walk me through what
Explain
we're
that a
talking
little
about there?
more thoroughly.
Sure. So you have a certain lease, and let's just say that lease ends in 2035.
This is cash flow that we're expecting.
Yeah. So, but the cash flow ends in 2030. So you have a lease where the cash flow that's coming into the city would end in, say, 2030, but the lease continues on to 2035. There's no payments at the end of the lease. There's a kind of a holiday on the lease payments. So how it was calculated was as if it was ending 2030 when it should have been to 2035, and I might have that backwards, or if you want to. Okay, yeah, so it was ending 2030 when the payments ended, but really it kept going on. And so, till 2035, and so for financial statement purposes, you need to recognize revenue straight line over the whole period of time, not just when the payments are received. And so it's just a recognition of revenue, and again, not cash flow. You received the right payments, you recorded the right payments that you received from a cash flow perspective. It's a revenue recognition accounting GASB treatment.
Yeah, it's a misstatement.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? I will say Ms. Adams and I, as the chair and vice chair, met separately and went over a lot of this in detail, so we were comfortable with it as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And one more thing, Chair. Again, we want to thank our staff for working so diligently with you. They are invaluable to the organization, and we just want you guys to know we appreciate you so much. And thank you to you and your organization for assisting us with this audit. Thank you.
All right, City Clerk, please read G2.
Item G2, consideration of items relating to the use of the city's allocation of coronavirus local fiscal recovery funds.
Let me make an opening comment. These funds we refer to as ARPA, which is the American Recovery, whatever it is, Act.
American Rescue Plan Act.
Rescue Plan, well, I was close. Several weeks ago, we issued our first tranche, and we gave out money to 4 or 5 organizations. This is the second and final one, I believe, where we're dispersing the funds. And they're going to a number of organizations, and I know a number of y'all are here today. So I will, Tiffany will give you the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Clark, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the committee and council.
Good afternoon.
I'm Tiffany Oliva, Director of Intergovernmental Affairs and Strategic Initiatives. The item before you today does 3 main things that I just want to highlight before I dig a little deeper into each one of them. The first, as Chairman Clark mentioned, it approves 10 transformational grants to different organizations' projects. 2, moves the remaining balance in the ARPA framework to the housing assistance set aside. And then 3, recommends the use of the revenue replacement method for up to the full amount of our federal award from Treasury. So first, we'll cover the transformational grants. As Councilmember Clark mentioned, we did receive 89 applications total to an amount of $50.7 million requested. And earlier this year, we approved 5 projects totaling $6.1 million. And so those previously approved projects were to prepare young people to meet the workforce challenges of tomorrow, break the cycle of intergenerational poverty, and also to foster holistic recovery, well-being, and social cohesion through the arts. On the screen, you can see that we've recommended 10 organizations totaling about $4.4 million and depleting the balance of the transformational grants earmark. So I'll go through each one of these very briefly. Recommended organizations scored in either tier 1 or 2 of our scoring matrix and or also received broader support from the city council members on a survey that you completed earlier this year. So these are not in any particular order, but we are recommending $500,000 to Imprints Cares for program support for their Family Resource Center for children with exceptional needs, for expanded learning programs, ready for school programs. $386,115 to Acción Hispana, doing business as Que Pasa for Proyecto Mariposa, which is also known as, or translated to Project Butterfly, for an online hub of information to serve the Hispanic Latinx community. $500,926 to Goler Community Development Corporation in partnership with the Winston-Salem Black Chamber of Commerce for their Tech Careers program to increase employability in the IT industry. IFB Solutions, Industries for the Blind, $300,000 for job training and employment for people who are blind. 60 new hires, including 30 who might be blind or visually impaired, as well as retraining 67 employees on textile manufacturing. $195,000 to Piedmont Environmental Alliance for Green Communities, Green Jobs, to grow the green job economy, build intersectional solutions, and forward-thinking environmental initiatives. $450,000 to Senior Services for intergenerational programs for arts and wellness. $660,000 for Smart Starter for Forsyth County to support their Winston-Salem Child Care COVID-19 Relief Fund. This will help open and maintain closed licensed family child care facilities and also provide early childhood coaches to each of those businesses. $750,000 to Union Community Development Corporation for programs that enhance community life, STEAM programs, family development, job skills, anti-gang corner-to-corner programs. And the last two, $116,573 to Crosby Scholars to develop a customized data analytics software system that'll take their services to the next level, and $500,000 to United Health Centers to help them in relocating to Southside Plaza Shopping Center to provide access to quality care in a facility that meets industry standards. So most of those organizations are represented here today. The second piece of this item notes that available in our framework are $2.8 million in leftover recovery grant funds to be reallocated, as well as extra administrative funds, both together totaling about $3.77 million. We're recommending to move those funds to the housing assistance set aside. So on your screen, you can see the set aside for housing assistance. This would be before later approving this action. And if we move those funds, it would bring the grand total of that set aside to $23.8 million. The remaining balance after actions previously taken is about $13 million. By moving this extra funding, you bring that remaining balance to about $17 million.
And that is part of the motion.
This is part of this item as well, correct? And then third on this item, also part of the motion, staff have conducted additional calculations and have determined that we as a city may claim up to the full federal award in revenue replacement. And so you've seen this slide before, but this is just reminding you of the process. Each year we're able to calculate revenue loss through a formula that's provided to us by Treasury. With that formula, you then identify services that you can cover, like public safety salaries. You transfer funds to cover those services, but you report the services covered to Treasury and what programs were made possible as a result of using the revenue replacement method. And so that piece is really important, is just sharing that narrative of what's made possible through using this method. Using the revenue replacement method has been endorsed and recommended by many local government professional organizations as the best way to make use of American Rescue Plan Act dollars. This would significantly lower compliance burden and overall reduces some liability on our end, but will also still ensure that when we're building agreements with these organizations, we're putting in measures for projects to make sure that they're tracking on what they said they would do, and do so in a way that would exceed perhaps what we would put in place for community agency funding. So you all previously approved about $31.3 million in revenue replacement in March, and so this would allow us to take the full federal award, the 51.7 in revenue replacement method. So those are the three parts of this resolution.
Any questions or comments? Can I get a motion then?
I move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion to second.
I have a question.
Oh, excuse me, Ms. Adams.
On the revenue replacement piece, could you elaborate a little bit on that for the council?
Sure. So the revenue replacement method, basically, the Treasury gives us a formula. We use that formula, and it tells us that we had this much revenue loss per year. Right now, our calculations are showing that we have more revenue loss than even what our federal award was, upwards of $60 million, and our award was 51.7. So what the revenue replacement method allows us to do is to, technically, we're funding something like public safety salaries with the ARPA funds, but then we're able to use general funds to fund all of these other ARPA projects. And so for us as a city, that alleviates a lot of compliance burden, also helps us so that in audit, we might not get dinged for minute details. Just makes it easier for us to execute the programs. So that's the kind of greatest benefit of using the revenue replacement method. But you also, in reporting to Treasury, need to make sure that we're telling the story of, we funded this, but this is really what's being made possible through the funds.
It's, Chair Clark, is this a recommendation or is it part of the motion?
Part of the motion.
So we're saying that we will use ARPA funds so we can make it easier or whatever?
Yeah, it's really more of a paperwork.
It is more of accounting, a paperwork piece, and it is recommended by the School of Government and other professional associations as the best way to, on the books, manage the funds. But ultimately, you're freeing up those dollars on the general fund side, which makes it possible for us to fund all those other projects.
You finished?
Maybe I'm missing something. I don't, I mean, it may be seamless and transparent, but, and I apologize because I didn't get that out of this when I read this a couple of times the past couple of days. Did we know about the extra 20 million before? Okay, we did the 31. When did we know about the 20?
So we found out about the 20 as we were going through the audit process. We found out there were some differences in the calculation that we'd been conducting, and so we realized that we could actually use the revenue replacement for the full amount. So that's been more of a recent finding.
Okay, I'm done.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I just think that's a great idea. I mean, I think most of us have been a little bit worried about hitting those compliance that has to be committed by 24 and totally spent by 26. And with all these grants out there, I think we're all going to be a little bit nervous about getting that done. But, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say there are 10 grants here to support 10 critical organizations that are here in the audience. Most of them are here. And I think if they're moderately successful in what they're saying they're going to do, it will definitely be transformational to our community as we work to reduce poverty, support arts and wellness, employment opportunity, as well as having environmental impact. So I think it's a great package and certainly support it.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Larson.
Yes, I had a question about the roughly $7 million that was the residue remaining and the allocation of that to the housing fund. Is that money intended basically as part of the choice neighborhood payback? How is that, what is?
No, not necessarily. So the housing set aside would mean that you all would later come to a determination of which projects to fund with that. So far, some of the projects that you all had approved were the choice, $5 million for choice, almost $5 million for choice neighborhoods, but also the recently approved Habitat for Humanity Stone Terrace development, Homeland Ministries development, Christ Rescue Temple, Boston Thurman Community Network, and SG Adkins. So remaining in that, basically this action would increase the amount of that set aside to $23 million. Right. And then you would have still $16 million left to allocate to other projects relating to the area of housing assistance and affordable housing.
So of all the grant applications that we received, the 90 or so applications that we received and were evaluated, none of those warranted leaving those back in a third grant project?
Out of the 89 applications received through the transformational grants process, we pulled the ones related to housing out, and then we passed those on to community development. So some of the ones that were recently approved, like Homeland Ministries and SG Adkins, those were ones that were identified through the transformational grant submission that was made.
I guess my concern is that we're piling some more money into housing, which is certainly a city priority, but I'm also have some concern that there are a bunch of agencies out there that applied for money and they apparently are not even in the running anymore. More money's being set aside. We've set aside now how many million for housing out of all this?
It would bring the new the remaining balance of the set aside to $16.7 million for housing.
Could you bring that graph?
Yeah, sure. So 12.9 was the old remaining balance. This would bring it to 16.7 in the remaining balance of housing set aside. I can't speak to what projects might be recommended on remaining in that pool of funding. I think that would be a question for Marlon Newman, Community Development Director.
So we're dedicating, if I read this correctly, $23.7 million for housing out of,
if this action is approved.
Out of the 51 that we received.
Correct.
And all these other agencies, all these travel and tourism, arts agencies, and whatever that applied and were not being funded.
20 million was already approved, so this would just move an additional 3.7 over to the housing set aside.
I understand that. I understand that we cut out initially 20,000 as a city
Correct.
priority, but now we're piling in basically the money that we intended for the other agencies, and those other agencies aren't getting the money. It's going back into housing.
The 3.8 remaining that's moving in was not originally intended for the transformational grants process. That remaining funding actually came from recovery grants and then also through additional administrative funds. But it is our recommendation that it go to housing. Of course, it's up to the discretion of the city council of how you all want to move the money.
I just share with my council members, fellow council members, that we have great needs out there in both social services and in arts organizations that were articulated in the grant application process. A number of agencies went to a great deal of effort. And I don't know, out of the 90-some applications that we received, well, I think we're funding, close to 20 of them maybe, total, which is not a great ratio of return. And so I would request, I guess, that this money not be put aside for housing at this point in time, but be pulled out to go back and look at, particularly, the council members prepared their top 10 list of agencies to be funded. And out of those top 10, how many of those were not funded as a result of our process that we've undertaken here? If we've got $3.7 million left, we can have a significant impact on the arts and travel industry as well as social services within the city. Not saying that housing is not important, but we've already dedicated a great deal of money to that.
John, I would suggest you bring that up at the full council meeting.
Well, because it has to come out of committee in some form or fashion, I think the committee needs to.
Well, unless there's a motion from a committee member.
I don't have a comment.
But I don't hear a motion coming. But it's a good point. You made a valid point. Ms. Adams, you had another comment.
Yes, I did. Yes, I do. We all agreed, again, I have to keep rewinding this tape. We all agreed that housing is our priority. Housing functions as a total resource, whatever you want to call it, for people. If a person has a house, they have somewhere to live, be warm, some stability. They can go get a job. They got an address. They can begin to build wealth if they're buying. They could help alleviate rent, high rent, if they can lock in a rate that they can afford to rent to own. So I beg the council to always keep in mind the big picture. Housing is what we voted on as our priority. Now, I do understand, Councilmember Larson, that there are some organizations out of the 90-something that we got that we all knew, and if we didn't, we all knew everybody wasn't going to get some. We knew that. So we had to prioritize because that's the only way you're going to ever get anything out the door. But I did suggest to the council, I thought, and staff, that a lot of the applicants, their proposals were not adequate because they don't have the assets, the resources, the staff, the infrastructure to put together a government grant, because that's basically what it was. It was basically a government grant request proposal. So I suggested that we use some of this money to help those agencies that don't quite have the expertise, that we assist them. And other cities across the country are doing this as well. Because now you level when you talk about equity and diversity and intentional and inclusion, now you're leveling the playing field for these smaller agencies to be able to go get grant money, not just from the city, but the feds, the state, everywhere, versus the ones that were granted. They've probably been getting grants for years, for decades, some of them, so they know how this goes. I just think it's our responsibility as a city with this money, which again is still all taxpayer money, that we have a segue in there that they are allowed to be able to participate equitably. Thank you, Chair Clark.
Chair.
Mr. McIntyre.
I just want to chime in on the housing aspect. We constantly, and for my entire time on city council, 9 years, we talk about how to break the cycle of poverty. You can look at it from education, look at it from healthcare, you can look at it from job training. I think fundamentally, you can't get any of those other things done unless you have a roof over your head. So where I come down is, that has been our main focus. It's been our top priority for years. And once you get a roof over your head, then you can attack some of those other problems. So I look at that as a good place to invest our money.
If I could just comment, and then we're going to vote here. This is a very valuable page for everybody, because at the very bottom on the left, the 51 million, is all the money we got for ARPA. And all those things above it is where we've spent it or allocated it. For example, we allocated $3 million to the digital divide, and that is providing internet service throughout the town. What we've then done at the top is taken the housing, the 23 million, that's with the new allocation over, and you'll see what we've already spent money on. 800 to Habitat, 600 to SG Atkins, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very comprehensive page that shows you where the money is and the balance is left. With that, we have a motion and a second, and if the committee will please vote. That is approved. For you folks that came here tonight for your appropriate organization, this will be at the January 3rd meeting. It is my personal recommendation that you have someone in this room in case questions come up. Tonight you're here and you didn't get to say anything, you didn't get on TV or anything, but you never know. Monday night, the mayor may ask a question about, I see the imprints lady back there, someone may ask a question about it, and if you're not here, you just never know. So anyway, thank y'all for coming, and you're certainly welcome to stay for the remainder of the committee.
And you can come and see us anytime you want, not just when you're picking up a check.
We have a few more items. If the city clerk please read G3.
Item G3, consideration of items related to a 3-year funding commitment to the Center for Creative Economy and Agile City.
Ms. Leva, can you come to the podium, and if you'll please go over this for us.
Sure. So Center for Creative Economy and Agile City. I don't have a presentation for this one. I'm
That's
just
fine.
speaking. Both of these organizations requested funding through the transformational grants process. However, it was later determined that general economic development activities that seek to more generally enhance the jurisdiction's business climate would generally not be eligible according to the frequently asked questions regarding the coronavirus local fiscal recovery funds. These organizations, CCE originally requested $779,000, and Agile City requested $1,553,000. Because these organizations either received high scores, scoring in Tier 1 or 2 on the matrix, and/or received broader support by the City Council on the survey, city staff worked to identify another legal source of funding for each CCE and Agile's proposed projects. So we're recommending an amount not to exceed $300,000 for the Center for Creative Economy and $300,000 to Agile City from Economic Development Project Funds through December 31st, 2026, consistent with public purposes established in the Economic Development and Community Development statutes. Agile Cities project, they're taking a little bit of a new approach with this for Venture Winston grants. In their second cohort, they're working to recruit up to 8 promising startups that are working on our city's most pressing social determinants of health. They plan to identify up to 3 social determinants of health in partnership with community members and with the city to recruit those 8 cohort members. And then Center for Creative Economy is requesting funding for a pre-kinetic program, which is basically to help early stage entrepreneurs, those who might have an inkling of an idea but not feel fully ready to enter into the kinetic stage of things. And then also for the Recalibrate program, which is a summit to recharge, refocus, and reinvigorate businesses. Ultimately, we hope that both of these projects and organizations, through the funding provided, will eventually be able to bring more jobs to Winston-Salem.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? I have a comment. Ms. Adams and then Ms. Scipio.
Yes, I just want Chair and committee and council and the mayor and staff, I want all of the applicants to understand, and I will repeat this, not just next council meeting, but every meeting just about, you're gonna hear me talk about this. You might wanna make sure you're doing whatever you said you were gonna do in that application. Don't think that maybe staff not auditing you. Don't think some of us like me won't show up at your site. And I do know how to audit. That's what my job was. I appreciate everything that you all are doing, but some of the stuff that's in these applications, Chair Clark, I want to see it because it's going to have to happen. And we're not going to wait until at the end of the cycle when it's time to ante up back to the feds. We're going to be getting with you on the regular because we have to ensure the buck stops with us, that our citizens reap the benefits of this money that's transformational. Thank you, Ms. Olivia.
Ms. Scipio. Cut your mic on there.
Mike's off.
Thank you. Just for clarification, are these loans or is this a grant? And it looks like it's coming from our Economic Development Loan Fund.
Economic Development Project Fund, not the loan fund. So the project fund, and you had another question, I'm sorry. What was the other question?
If it was a loan or a grant.
A grant, yes.
Ms. Mayor, you got a comment?
Just quickly, both of these projects or programs have been, I think, very effective. We had, Karen, 9 in the first cohort, and those companies are here. They're getting traction. They're getting additional investment in creating jobs. Center of Creative Economies has created 70 startups, I believe, if I remember correctly, and all that number, 85% are still in operation there. So they're producing good results, and I think this will allow them to continue to work.
Thank you. Can I get a motion?
Motion approved.
And a second?
Second, one more comment, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Again, I don't mind, and somebody put out there that I was anti-business over the past few years, and that is not true. If you check my record, as Ms. Burke used to say, you'll see I voted on at least 99% of economic incentives that are requests from the city. But what I want you to understand again, if you're not helping people that live in these qualified census tracts, if you're not helping people that need the help versus the people that don't, again, I'm going to have a problem. My community is going to have a problem. So just keep that in mind. And I know you've been doing the work. I got it. But, like I said, look at your demographics. Look at your board. I've talked to some of you about it. If the city is over 38, 40% people of color, and these are the people that you claim that you're serving or going to serve, then you need to get with the program today and be intentional about who is helping to make the policy and your brand in your organization if you're going to be serving poor people, because basically that's what this is all about. So one more question, Councilmember Clark. Are there clawbacks in this money? The $300,000 to each of these, because these are economic incentives.
I don't know. I'd have to get staff to.
Mr. Garrity, can you take care of that and have that for Monday night, please?
If that's, good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joines, members of the council. Yes, we can, I'll talk to the city attorney's office, see if we can add a clawback.
We have to. We do it for everybody.
And we will also, I just talked to Mr. Test, I just texted him. We'll make sure internal audits what they do as we go along.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion second. If the vote, please. That is approved. Thank you very much. And to Ms. Collins and Ms. Barnes, I would also recommend y'all be here next Tuesday, or week, whatever is a week from Tuesday. Okay, just got 3 more items. G4, City Clerk, please read this.
Item G4, resolution approving the calendar year 2023 federal action plan for the city of Winston-Salem.
You own the mic tonight.
I know. Hopefully y'all don't get tired of me.
No way.
This item, since 2005, we've worked with Strategic Consulting on legislative and advocacy assistance, and through that agreement have generated nearly $76.5 million in assistance. Furthermore, $2.8 million is pending for community project funding, and language has also been secured for the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative for about $5 million if approved. So if it's okay with you, I'd actually like to turn it over to Leslie Mazingo with Strategics just to give a brief presentation.
Leslie, if you would please give your name and address for the record.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr.
And
Chairman.
who you are, so they'll know
Your
who you
title, who you are.
Okay, terrific. My name is Leslie Mazingo, and the address in terms of federal consulting is 444 North Capitol Street, Suite 840, Washington, D.C. 2001. And locally in the area is 4315 Woodburn Drive, Clemens, North Carolina, 27012.
And you're the president of the,
And my name is Leslie Mazingo, and I am the owner and CEO of Strategics Consulting. I left that part out.
That does what?
And we are the federal advocacy firm for the city of Winston-Salem. Was there anything I left out?
No.
she's a real living lobbyist, if anything.
A real one.
A
Please,
real one, not fake. I am not a figment of the imagination.
you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee and City Council. So nice to see you in person, and met with many of you recently to develop the federal action plan for the calendar year 2023 or fiscal year 24, depending on how you want to look at it. A couple of quick comments that I want to make about this is the process. So we go through this process, as many of you know, but for the good of your listeners, we go through this process annually, and then also in particular before a new Congress, where we meet with your assistant managers and their direct reports. We talk with key staff members, and we meet with you individually to hear what items you're most interested in to make sure that we make those priorities for the federal action plan. This is our marching orders as a firm at Strategics. We use this to know where your priorities are. We share this with the congressional delegations so they know what your priorities are. And it's also a method in which you can gauge success as we move forward. So it's used in many different ways, but it is shared publicly, and it is definitely used, as you all know. We start off usually kicking off when the mayor's at the U.S. Conference of Mayors as an introduction, and then strong reinforcement by all of you during the National League of Cities. And that is done both with the congressional delegation on Capitol Hill as with the federal agencies. So it is a working document, no doubt about that. It is also flexible enough that if we get blindsided by something like a pandemic, like we did in 2020, when you all were in Washington and we were making the rounds, and we really didn't have a lot to say about COVID at the time, and then we came back and everything changed, and our whole year was spent working on, quite frankly, a lot of the ARPA dollars that you were dedicating this evening that you spent a lot of time advocating for. So we do remain flexible for those initiatives that come up that we have to be able to address. And then it would go, I shouldn't not mention that in addition to putting together the draft, we go through a two-committee process. It goes through full council. So again, when your elected officials in Washington receive it, they know that it has been well vetted and approved, and that they can work on anything in the federal action plan with your blessing. So that's a quick overview. It's a process that we spend months preparing for to make sure that we get everything there. You will notice some of the changes from the last federal action plan to this one is, although COVID continues and you're still working on your ARPA dollars, we moved that down on the list. It's just natural that the first thing you see on the list is something that's going to stand out. So we moved that down a little bit and put all of our grants at the top, so that we could again reinforce that we are actively and aggressively going after all of these federal dollars through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Inflation Reduction Act, and the annual appropriations process. So we've got that as well. Some other areas that we that you'll notice.
Leslie, can you hang on a second?
Sure.
Can we get what we're seeing in our agenda up on the screen?
You will
Possible.
have to do that.
I'm looking at the audience and they're all like, what is she talking about?
Okay.
Thanks, Katie.
Terrific. All right, so, and this is your first page, and so, so some of the things you will notice, I'd like to point out, there's a lot on here that is repetitive. It's things you've approved before. That's because the work is never done. You've been talking about affordable housing, homelessness, the public infrastructure pieces. There is, there's still dollars available that we're going after annually. We've got grants that we're reapplying for. But most importantly, they're just, like I said, the work is not done, and we have to continue knocking on doors and walking the halls and working on those issues. In some other cases, you'll know that we added in specific examples that we wanted to be able to point to. So, in the very front there at the competitive grants, we highlighted that you have a Reconnecting Communities initiative. Many of you mentioned that in your meetings individually, your support for that application. So that was added in so that we can specifically address that. And then also, we added in various parts. We added in, for example, the Kimberly Park Hydroponic Farm, where we have some initiatives there. And then on the next one, and I want to make sure, do I just go to the right? Good, I did it correctly. Woo! And then I want to also call your attention here on the second page. We carved out and added in specifically the environment bullet there, and a lot of that has to do with not only the areas that y'all mentioned in sustainability, renewable energies, energy efficiency, but it's also an area where there's a lot of federal funding, as I mentioned, specifically in the BIL. They, as you know, expanded it to include other infrastructure, and in a large part of that was in the renewable energy sector. There was a number of things also identified. Some folks referred to the Inflation Reduction Act as a climate bill because there was so much in there for those purposes. So we felt it was important to pull that out as its own unique identifier, and you'll actually be hearing more in the future about some funds in the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant that you're going to be awarded as a direct allocation. So again, these are things that we felt like needed to get its own highlight. In the interest of time, I know you've got a lot going on, so I'll try to be fast, but I do want to point out a couple of things. It's an aggressive agenda. And so we are not going to get everything that we ask for.
Never do. But whatever it is that we get, Leslie, and I've been around you for 13 years, it's usually pretty good for us.
It's very good. Well, you heard the numbers earlier. I think that's a record that speaks for itself in terms of, and it's a team effort. I mean, this isn't something I do alone. This is you all advocating as your own best advocate, and without your trips and without your phone calls and all of that, we wouldn't have that success. So it's important that the public know that too. I work on forums and talking points and setting up schedules and all those things and helping you know when the timing is right. But without your direct involvement the way it is, it just doesn't happen the way that it does. But we do go after everything that we can. We like to point out the priorities. In terms of the competitive grants, again, we try to be very methodical. It's one thing to be eligible for a grant. It's another to be competitive.
Right.
So we try to make sure the timing is right in terms of your information and your data and the things that you need to be most successful. But we also have to remember, and we do factor in, there's an implementation side to this, and a reporting and a compliance. And so we work very hard to get with your staff to make sure, because the last thing you want to do is mess up on the compliance side. And then when you go back to apply for the next grant, you've tarnished your reputation. So there's a lot to balance. It's not just a matter of going after every grant that comes about. You've been very wise in setting up a grant writing fund ahead of time so that we can expedite when we need to, and you've got those funds available that is on a drawdown basis and only with prior approval. But again, just wanted to kind of, for the good of the order, make sure everybody understands that while we go after everything we can, we also try to be very strategic about that process and identifying those priorities. And so in the meantime, you will see things that say fund these programs or support these programs. As a final comment, that really helps direct your congressional delegation that we want these programs to continue. Many of the funds happen by formula, by block grant, It's not really a competitive grant situation, so we want those to continue to flow. They're programs on which the city relies. But also, in some cases, we know we're going to be applying for funds, but maybe this isn't the year, and we want to make sure those funds are in place so when we do get ready to apply, they're still being funded. So a lot of times we're supporting programs that we know we're getting ready to be proactive in terms of pursuit. So with all of that, I will pause and take any questions you may have for me.
Questions or comments? Mr. Mundy?
Thank you so much for the report and all these extra details. I want to go back to a conversation that you and I had. Did you tell me that this is the first time that we have specifically included supporting human rights legislations for LGBTQ people?
It is an expansion of some items that you brought to our attention last year that we included in it, but this year we did expand that in on the human services side in particular.
So
Yes,
just
sir.
to point that out to any of the folks in my tribe who are listening or reading about this later, we are making progress and we are in fact walking the walk, not just walking the talk, rather, not just giving it lip service. And thank you so much for making sure that was included.
Yes, sir.
Can I get a motion?
Move for approval.
Second.
Second, motion is second on the item. G4, if we'll vote when it comes up.
Chair, I've got a comment after the vote.
Okay, everybody vote. Go ahead, sir.
Bef-
It approves. Go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank Leslie and her crowd for really navigating an incredibly complex minefield in DC and knowing where to put our efforts and energies. We also want to talk about, we do this same type of an effort at the state level. Mayor Pro Tem sits on the National League of Cities Board. They have an agenda. And then I sit on the North Carolina League of Municipalities, and we do the same process. So serving on city council is only one aspect, or these meetings are not really the end of our efforts. We push on all fronts. We try to find every dollar that's available to us. So I just want to let citizens know that we're out there working for every dollar we get, and we couldn't do, especially at the federal and state level, we couldn't do it without help from folks like Leslie. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie.
Will the city clerk please read G5?
Item G5, information on the potential purchase of property for future development, 1539 Waughtown Street, located in the Southeast Ward.
This is for information only.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Pellet, if you'll please present it.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and members of council. In September at the Finance Committee, we heard from Carol Davis with the Atkins CDC about the property at 1539 Waughtown Street. Some of you may know that as the old Nissan Wagon Works property. She had approached us for potential financial assistance to purchase that property and redevelop it. Phase one of that redevelopment was envisioned as a co-warehousing space that would provide smaller scale warehouse space for those who may not need space of their own. Since that time, the North Carolina general statutes were reviewed, and it was determined that perhaps the best way for the city to pursue redevelopment of that property would be to acquire it directly. The idea would be city could control the property, do an assessment in terms of how that property could be redeveloped to best serve the community, whether that be the original vision of the Atkins CDC, whether that be industrial, commercial, perhaps even residential redevelopment there. At this point, details are still to be determined, but we wanted to bring this pivot because, again, the first time you heard about this, it was potential financial assistance to a CDC to acquire the property. Now we're sort of pivoting to the city acquiring the property itself. So we do plan in January to bring back details, perhaps in closed session, that will include more information than we have now about potential pursuit for direction from council as to potential control of that property.
Thank you. We look forward to that in January.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay, thank you. We have one more item that was put on the agenda. Or did we do that?
No, that was
That was
consent item.
On the consent.
That was on consent.
I'm sorry, folks, that's it.
see you next year.
Thank you all again. This will all go to the full board on January the 3rd, and the mayor will be chairing that meeting. We will be adjourned, and public safety will start at 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
Thank you all for coming. We are adjourned.